What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the LineupHQ tutorial here today. We're doing a little bit of a special show. We've got a lot of users at RotoGrinders, right? And some of them email in. They want to know, hey, how do you guys use LineupHQ to get better? So I have brought out of show retirement Mr. Chris Gimino, creator of a lot of different things behind the scenes here at RotoGrinders. Chris, how's it going?
Yeah, they brought me out of the bunker. I'm finally on Earth. I just saw the sun for the first time in days the other day. It was great. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to do this. You know, we get a lot of questions about how can we get better at DFS? How can we use the tools better? You know, and quite frankly, DFS, the bar is just being elevated. You need to get better at using tools and understanding not just who to play, but how to play the game, how to use the game theory angles of the game, how to understand what it is that's important and leads to winning in DFS. And we're here to talk about a bunch of that stuff here in using LineupHQ.
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing today to kind of get you guys to play along with us on the show today is we had our good friends over at FanDuel. They have set us up with a 20 max free roll, and we're going to give away swag to this. The problem is there's no actual prizes in the prize pool because we don't want you cheating, just putting in 1 or 2 or even 15 entries. So we've made up a rule today. If you want to win anything in this free roll, the top 3 people will get their choice of a RotoGrinders t-shirt or hat. Just send me a DM on Twitter afterwards, and I'll sort it out through the various channels. But you're going to have to max enter this. So we've made 20 entries, and we want you to play along with us as we do this on show or later in the day here. So here's the link for it. I'm going to post it right in the RotoGrinders chat. It'll bring you to the game, and we're requiring you to put the max amount of entries into this. If you just put 1 in, right, and you win, you're not getting any swags. And the next person who put 20 entries in here. So we encourage you to play along on the show. We're going to show you how to do it, and I'll mention this a couple of times during the show today. So, Chris, you know, you've had your fingers, your hands making all this stuff here. So I'll let you kind of guide me to some of the main stuff here right on your main page as you jump into LineupHQ. What's important? What can you do? You got any tips and tricks for the guys to get started?
I mean, right away, the first thing that we want to do a lot of times is, you know, we have this great sidebar where you can get to access to a lot of information and a lot of good stuff so you can work side by side. I like to zoom out LineupHQ, so I'm looking at like 80% zoom so I can get a bunch of stuff on my screen. We got a big monitor here, but not everyone's got that capability. So what I like to do is if I'm trying to get as much space as possible, I like to hide that sidebar, really get to see, you know, as much as possible of LineupHQ when I'm going to do a build. Another thing that I like to tell people who are just starting out is get familiar with sort of the mechanics of everything. Where is everything get lined up? Where's the lock button? What is, you know, what happens when you press the lock button? Where's the exclude button? You know, what are these exposure settings that we'll talk about that in a little bit? You know, how do I filter a team so that I can look at just one team at a time? I can see you doing some of the stuff on the screen. And I think it's important for people to be paying attention to this and looking, you're just getting generally familiar with how to operate some of the basic interface stuff. We're not going to spend a lot of time on all that today, but, you know, just getting familiar with how to operate the player pool is something that's, you know, very important in a lot of sports. I think in baseball, I do probably the least excluding of any sport.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't exclude anybody from the player pool, but, you know, in a lot of sports, I will spend a lot of time curating that pool so it's just the guys I like.
Yeah, I'm more likely to exclude, I think, pitchers than I am try to take hitters out of the player pool because even Jeff Mathis can hit like 3 home runs on a single day. It's very unlikely, but hey, that's in the outcomes for basically any player in baseball. So I do like to take maybe exclude a couple of pitchers. You know, guys that project a little bit lower at the bottom. We're looking at FanDuel right here. So let's say I didn't like, again, I'm not saying I like or don't like this guy today, but if I didn't like Homer Bailey and I didn't want him showing up in my pool, I could just hit the little X button, that's exclude, and then I'm going to get no Homer Bailey. And as you mentioned, the lock button, right? If I like Justin Verlander, now if I'm playing a lot of entries, maybe I don't want 100% of a pitcher, but if I did, right, I could just click the lock button. And then as we progress through the show, Justin Verlander, you can see here, he's going to show up in all my lineups over here. And then if you're just kind of making an optimal lineup, he shows up in the lineup preview too, which is kind of how I use this to kind of make my cash game over here. And then as we progress through the show, we'll get a little bit more in depth on some of the tournament stuff here. Don't forget too, some people don't even, you know, basic functions of LineupHQ. This is why we wanted to go to it. If you wanted to filter by teams, you would just unclick the all, and then you would, you know, if you wanted to see just the Baltimore pitchers or the Baltimore hitters, you can have them here, and it's pretty easy to use once you kind of figure it out here. Anything else on this main screen here? We talked about the sidebar. We talked about the preview. how I use this for gash games. You got anything else you really want to hit on right here? Or do you want to get more into the nuts and bolts?
Yeah, look, for premium subscribers, I'm not recommending that anybody ever just take the word of anyone and say these are the guys you need to play on any given day. But you look at the premium filters up there. If you clicked on a bunch of those, I'm not sure. Yeah, we've got Cheese's core plays in there right now. Click on a bunch of those. If you're short on time, if you're someone who really doesn't have the bandwidth to do a lot of studying on a particular day, but you want to get a little bit of action, I certainly don't recommend putting in a ton of action if you haven't had a ton of time to research. But if you need some help to get a lineup in there quickly, I would recommend relying on some of these premium filters just to get an idea, to jumpstart what you're trying to do on a nightly basis. Like I said, I would never recommend that anyone just strictly take the word of really anybody as a way to play DFS. I think that ultimately, if you want to get better and you want to become a complete player, you need to learn why these are being selected as the plays, sort of understand that. And then again, if you're someone who's newer, I think this is really just a way for you to sort of crutch yourself while you learn.
All right, let's jump into kind of the more nuts and bolts. And you're going to see some things as we progress through the show, if you are a premium member, that you don't even have access to because the wizards behind the scenes, they're always busy writing up new code to get some new stuff. And I think we're going to show you some things that are coming pretty shortly for premium members that I currently have access to right now. But let's go over the screen because this is basically how you start making tournament lineups on the lineup builder. I want to kind of go over these one by one, maybe get your input on kind of settings you use. I'll tell you what I like, and we can hash it out for the viewers here. So the first thing I want to talk about is range of outcomes. It's pretty simple math, right? Let's pretend a guy has a fantasy output of 10. And if you set the range of outcomes to 10%, it now gives you a 10% plus or minus on that 10 as a range of outcome for every single lineup that made. So if a guy has a outcome of 10 and you set this at 10%, somewhere between 9 and 11 every time his a lineup is made, he's going to get that for a projection here today. So what do you usually set these at for hitters? We've recently added the ability to just select pitchers because maybe pitchers have a little bit tighter range of outcomes than hitters. So we can talk about how we use these specifically.
So I use some different things normally to get diversification in my lineups and to get randomization in my lineups. There's some other ways to do it other than the range of outcomes. If I was going to set it, I usually set it at a smaller amount because I like to use more unique players per lineup. We'll talk about that a little bit later to get some variation in the lineups that come out. But basically for MLB, I'd be comfortable setting it at a higher number. I think once we make a change to the way this works, we actually have floor and ceiling projections, and we're going to be working on some other range of outcomes projections. Once we have that factored into the variation so that we're really working with players' true outcome curves, I think I'll be more willing to set that number higher. For now, something like maybe 20% if I'm really looking to, to get more variant in the way I build. But I think this really depends on what type of contest you're entering and really, what level of randomness you're looking for in your specific lineup. So I'm really not running all my lineups in one build. So I'm not usually looking for a massive amount of randomness.
You can do that now, by the way. We'll talk about that in a second, but pretty easy. So I think I like a little bit more range of outcome than you for hitters. I'll typically play with about 30% most of the time. Sometimes I'll play if the slate's a little smaller, maybe I'll bump it up a little bit more. The slate's a little bit bigger, I'll bump it up a little, bump it down a little. But I like around 30, you like around 20, but you probably have more uniques, which we'll get to in a second. And you don't need a high amount of range of outcomes and a high amount of uniques. Then you're just really getting too much randomness in your lineups, I think. So using one or the other or using them in conjunction is kind of the way I use to make lineups. So I'll set this at 30. And we've recently added the pitcher range of outcomes, which is the exact same thing. If a pitcher has a projection of 10, you set this at 10%. He's now going to get a number between 9 and 11 every single time a lineups get made. And if he happens to make the lineup, it was probably with the higher projection. So I think pitchers have a little bit tighter range of outcomes. Maybe not so much this year with, I think, the juice ball in baseball going on right now. But I'll typically set this, I don't know, maybe half, maybe, a 30-20, something like that. I just use a little bit tighter range for my pitchers. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm not using range of outcomes too much at all. I'm generally building my lineups in chunks. But I do want to touch on something real quick just to change the subject here about like sort of why range of outcomes matter. Like why are we not just optimizing on the median projection and taking the highest median score that we can get in the optimizer? And it's For me in MLB, it's just the pure variance of the sport. I really want, and this is not just exclusive to MLB, but it's probably most pronounced in MLB, where we're really not as concerned with taking the lineups that are the most optimal and just using great projections as a means to try to get an edge. A lot of times we want to look at what our opponents are doing and really try to capitalize on situations where we're taking the worst of it, from a projection standpoint in order to get lineups that are correlated. We're really focusing more on correlation in MLB than we are on optimization. So that's why range of outcomes is in randomization is probably something I'm more willing to do in MLB than say some other sports where more optimal projections are probably going to be in play more hardcore.
We've got our number of lineups to produce next. Most people just make their amount of lineups, right? We're going to make 20 lineups for the RotoGrinders free roll. I like to actually make more lineups than I'm making and do a couple things in Excel to maybe randomize them or pick specific lineups out of the the Excel sheet we're going to get to when we're importing. What do you do with lineup? Do you like to make some and then handpick the ones out of the lineup builder? There's a lot of different ways to do it. I think the easiest, if you're making 20 lineups, you got all your settings right, just make 20. If you're more advanced, you can do some other things as well.
A lot of times that is the number of lineups I'm making is 20, right? I'm busy. I got stuff to do. They got me in the dungeon, like I said.
I can't believe you're even on this show.
When I am able to make some lineups, I like to try to make 20, and I like to get in there and make, I'll build 20 to 50 at a time. I won't build 20 in one run and say, if those are my lineups. Like I said, a lot of times I will set it to a lower number, and I'll run 500, 1,000 lineups, and I'll just keep looking and looking and looking until I get the changing settings, looking for the lineups that suit me the best. And sometimes early in the day when I'm trying to figure out maybe how projections are affecting the optimizer, how projected ownership might go, I will run hundreds of lineups and try to change the settings and just look and see how things are shaking out there as well.
Let's go to number of unique players. So it really depends for me on what I'm trying to do. And it also would depend on the type of player you are and what you're trying to accomplish in your games, right? You gotta kind of know what you're doing with the settings to create the lineups that you would actually make if you were physically clicking them. So it all depends on your type of risk type. If you're a little bit more narrow band of players and you want a specific group of the best projected players, maybe you keep this at something like 2. If you want to diverse a little bit more and you want a wide range of players to account for the variable outcomes in any sport that you're playing, maybe you bump it up to 4 or 5. I'll typically play with 3. Again, it's very slate dependent. On bigger slates, maybe I want a little bit more diversity just to try to hope to hit the nuts in DFS. All the prizes seem to be really top heavy now. So you're really trying to hit first at some point during the season. Having a little bit higher uniques does that. So I'll change it, kind of on a whim, depending on the slate size and a couple other factors. You mentioned that you're more likely to use more uniques than the range of outcomes. So explain to me that strategy.
Yeah, so I'll usually run it with 4 these days in MLB. And what I'm looking to do is I want, when I have 20 lineups and say something like that 20 max deal they do on DraftKings, I want, my little dots on that to be spread wide. I don't want them all congested together. I've heard people talk about wanting to keep a tight core and using very similar lineups. I think it depends on your risk profile. If you do something like that, you're going to be boom bust on any particular day. If you're on the right kind of plays, if you're on the right stack and you've got 20 of the same one, all your guys are going to be up towards the top. I'm really more shopping around for that one lineup to just jump out of the pack and get to the tippy top. I'm looking for first place Brit.
Yep. Yeah, that's where all the money is nowadays. That's how the sites seem to make it. It didn't always used to be like that, but DFS, one of the keys is knowing the contest that you're into. If the prize structure is a little bit flatter, maybe I would go a little bit more uniques. But if it's top heavy, again, like Chris just said, I'm trying to go for the top with a little bit more uniques. The max exposure, there's a lot of different ways to kind of use this, because not only can you set a global, right? Let's say for pitchers, I'm okay having 50% of a pitcher, something like that, but I'm almost never okay having 50% of a batter, because again, there's just so many different outcomes that a batter can have. So how I like to do this is I typically set this, I don't even know, somewhere in the 20 to 30% range is like a global, but you can also go back into the player pool. And let's say I wanted to make sure I had at least 40% Justin Verlander. This is a minimum column right here. So I could put in 40% minimum Justin Verlander. And if I wanted a range for the algorithm to give them at least 40%, but no more than 50%. Now I'm going to make sure that even though I have my global setting at 25% max exposure or ownership, I have now manually boosted Justin Verlander to make sure he gets into more lineups. This is what I typically do. I'll set the global for kind of hitters. I really never even approach that with hitters. It's just kind of like a fail safe, and I'll kind of manually adjust the ownership of the pitchers that I want, Chris.
Yeah, and I end up doing that a lot too. Like I generally speaking will allow more, room for more pitchers in my builds than I will for hitters. I like to set the global exposure pretty low. Like to get that diversity, get a bunch of different teams mixed into my stacks when I run them. But for pitchers, there's usually a pretty tight core there. I'm not usually looking to get, into 10, 20 pitchers on any given slate. I'm usually trying to keep it a little bit tighter with just 20 lineups.
So going back to the build rules, salary. So salary in basketball, you almost always want to use it. Salary in NFL, you almost always want to use it. In baseball, you almost always want to use it, specifically on DraftKings where the pricing's really tight. On FanDuel where it's a little easier. I mean, for tournaments, Chris, I'm okay leaving a lot of money on the table sometimes in baseball. If it happens, I'll generally make sure that nothing really crazy would set in. But if I was playing on FanDuel and I had tournament teams with 1,000 left on the table, probably not the most ideal, but that's what happens sometimes when you get two lower-owned stacked teams in there and you get the best pitcher on FanDuel. You just have some money left over. So this would be a setting I think I would typically use on FanDuel. I see you crackling over there.
Yeah, I drag that left one all the way down to the bottom. I don't care at all. Like I really, I want to get two stacks that are together and correlated. Like we said, people don't have those combinations. If you're looking to really play in some of these big tournaments where you can just get tons of leverage on the field by having combinations that other people aren't using, I don't want the salary to be restricting that from the builder. I really want the most possible options that I can get in MLB. Like you said, for other sports, totally different story. But for MLB, I'm really, really comfortable leaving a lot of money on the table and sometimes almost prefer it.
All right, let's talk about the ownership one, because this is a really quick way to get yourself different lineups without even really doing too much in your player pool. This is like a shortcut, and the guys behind the scenes, they made this for, I think it was football last year. I was like, let's work this in here, and they built it up for us pretty quickly today. So I want to spend some time over this and how I use it. What you don't want, if you click, give me the optimal lineup on FanDuel, right? You can do that. And this is the theoretical early optimal lineup. Now, it's not a stack, but you really shouldn't have your tournament teams, specifically in the large field MME tournaments, right, with 10,000, 20,000. Your lineup really shouldn't look anything like this. And one of the easiest ways to accomplish that and make sure is to kind of limit the total of max ownership. And how I like to do that is I like to make some teams first with no ownership settings, and then I like to cut like a good portion of what I see the highest owned teams are. So maybe I could do this while you talk, but when I use Lineup Builder or LineupHQ, I'm almost, let's say the total ownership of some of the teams that we're coming up with none are like 170 or 180 in baseball. I might go to like 140 as my max, just to make sure my lineups aren't full of the same players everybody else is playing.
Yeah, so this is one way to get the diversity of player within each lineup, right? There's a couple of other ways. There's the running exposure percentages when building. Below there is one way. We mentioned player exposure caps, but this ownership setting is just one way to ensure, like say in something like an NFL, where if you're really not trying to go above a certain threshold of chalkiness within an individual line. You're comfortable having some chalky players in there, but you don't want it to exceed a certain point. Brit's describing one way that you can do that, and that's what this total ownership cap is all about. There's also a minimum ownership. I've never really run into a situation where the ownership was getting too low, but there's definitely a situation where you might want to make sure that you have a certain amount of plays that are really popular.
I usually set it at 50 for baseball, and again, it doesn't really approach that low, but with the range of outcomes, with unique players, every once in a while, out of 150, sometimes I'll even make 300 lineups if I'm making 150. I got some things I'll do in Excel every now and then. But you'll get a weird team every now and then, and generally that weird team, you need, like you said, you don't need all 1%ers and then 5% on pitchers. That's too far off the board, and you don't need all the chalk. But making sure you have something that's not all one-offs and not all chalk. This is a really quick shortcut to do something like that. And again, it all varies by slate. The smaller slate, you're going to have to change the numbers around a little bit. Today, when ownership's really spread out, maybe, you know, the number might even be a little bit lower to get away from all the chalk out there. But this is a really good tool to quickly make sure your lineups are what I consider good tournament builds, right?
Yeah, and if you're playing in cash games, maybe one reason to set that floor pretty high is, you know, chances are if they're projected highly in tournaments, a lot of those guys are going to be among the more viable cash game plays as well.
Yep. So let's see here. The flex, the latest start time doesn't really mean too much for baseball. Use min-max exposures. I like that. That's what I talked about over here with Justin Verlander, right? Even though I've set 25%, you know, on everybody else, you can, you know, if you only have like 10 pitchers in your player pool, it's pretty easy to give a couple of ranges of ownerships on players to make sure you get the players that you want specifically at pitcher, and then you let the batters do all the rest. And I like to set ranges because, you know, if the projections are giving me 50% Verlander, I want them to hit it. I don't just use a minimum or a target. I like to give a little bit of range. So a lot of different things can happen in the optimizer as it's working today. Do you use the min-max? Do you use like, yeah, the min-max is what I use as well. That's what I would do. The prioritize lineups over max exposure. This is just if you're new to it, you probably want to have this checked because it makes some lineups over some of your settings that might conflict with each other. So it's kind of like a dummy box where if you're having trouble getting all the lineups that you want without it, I would check this, and it's going to override some of your settings that might interfere with each other and allow a couple extra lineups to be built. So I would leave that checked. I even leave this checked pretty much all the time. And then the other thing is the running exposure percentages when building. Let's talk about this because this is like a big addition when we added it. It's been a while now, but it's been up here for a long time.
Sure. It's pretty simple. If you have an 80% cap on somebody, previously it would run until 80% of that guy was used, and it wouldn't care, you know whether or not one lineup after another used them consecutively. So you'd have the guys bunched towards the top. Running exposure percentages is a way so that once you reach the peak of that guy's exposure, it stops using them until he gets back under that threshold. So in other words, if you were making 20 lineups, once you got to 80%, like 4 out of 5, it would stop using them until it got back under 80%.
Yeah, so I almost always leave that checked. It just allows for a greater distribution of the players within your builds, and that's something I definitely want. I don't normally, like today, 14-game slate, I'm not going to have any hitters against my pitcher. If it's a 4-game slate, a 3-game slate, I'm okay hitting one every now and then and having a batter against one of my starting pitchers. I think that's fine. As long as the slate is small, but generally anything, I mean, maybe even a 4-game slate, I probably wouldn't do it. It's pretty much reserved for me. On the really small slates, like 3 and under, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I'm basically never taking a batter against my pitcher unless I make a mistake. So, but usually with LineupHQ these days, I mean, it's been a long time because you've got settings like this to prevent that from happening.
Again, guys, too, I want to let you know, I've got a link here. So right in the RotoGrinders chat, this is a free roll for FanDuel. And as you can see, I've got FanDuel pulled up on LineupHQ for the main slate. It's going to bring you to this page, and this is a 20 max entry free roll. There's no prizes in the prize pool, but what we're doing here at RotoGrinders is the top 3 people who max enter. The key is you must max enter this will get RotoGrinders swag. So all the top 3 different people who put in 20 entries and finish near the top of this will get a RotoGrinders t-shirt or a hat. After you win, just message me, just DM me on Twitter or send me a private message on RotoGrinders, and I'll get it all taken care of for you on the back end. But make sure to max enter, and we're going to play along. We're going to show you how to kind of upload these right to FanDuel. Because, Chris, I think it's time we start making some teams here. Why don't we go over to the hitter stacks tab? And I guess I can show them. I'm on the test site here we have for RotoGrinders. So before, to make different types of stacks, it was a little more difficult. So what we've done is we've created this thing that's called Quick Stacks. And let me give you a quick summarization of what you're going to be seeing. This isn't live yet, but it will be for you, I don't know, probably sometime next week. This is giving me, we're going to make 20 lineups. So if I set this at 75%, I'm going to get 15 4 stacks, and I'm going to get 5 or 25% 4-3 stacks on FanDuel, which, by the way, if I'm MMEing these large field tournaments, probably the only lineups I'm making on FanDuel, Chris. So this is a new addition here. What do you think about it? We can move over to DraftKings as well. We do a lot of the Slate IQ stuff, which is another premium article. Basically, always tells you the field never stacks enough. So if you're MMEing in baseball specifically, you should almost be making stacks as much as possible.
Especially on large slates like today. I mean, it's sometimes on FanDuel it gets difficult to get full stacks in there, and people give up. There's a lot. They don't want to go for that correlation. They're comfortable with the 4-2 or the 3x. But generally speaking, the data has shown us that full stacking on these bigger slates does tend to lead to more top end results. So that's what we're looking to do here with these quick stacks. We're setting up right now with 4 4s and 4 3s. And below, we're going to be able to tell the lineup builder which stacks we actually want to have built with those configurations.
Yep. So let's do some of that right now. I'm just, for the sake of time, we don't have a ton of time left here. I'm going to set a primary stack at 10 and a secondary stack, at 10. These can really vary. We're going to do more shows like this as well throughout the season, where we'll really spend a bunch of time in LineupHQ talking about what type of player do you want to be, and then how to translate that into how you make your stacks. I think that's something important, being the player you want to be and making the optimizer do what you actually want to do, which is another thing I'm going to show you in a second. Chat's really liking the quick stack, so we did something good here, Chris. Wait till they see the next one. I'm going to show them in a minute. So just for quickness sake, I'm going to do 10-10. I probably would not use this setting if I'm being honest. I think that's for a later date. What would you, if you're making 20 lineups today, what would be something you would do? This is basically going to give me 2 teams or maybe like 2 teams 8 times and a couple one-offs or something like that for stacks.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I would do. I'm playing on DraftKings, right? So I got the Slate IQ. Yep. I'm heading over to Slate IQ. I'm sorting leverage descending on projected ownership. Where can I expect to get some leverage today? And I'm going shopping for some teams there. I'm setting those teams in the left-hand column in my primary stack, and I'm loading up on them. On the right-hand side, I'm generally allowing more teams to be in existence there, maybe just excluding just a few. And I'm running the best combination of my primary stack and whatever secondary stacks I'm comfortable with.
All right, we'll have plenty of shows that get into different type of play styles for you guys at a later date, and we'll make sure you're well aware of it. But let's run this and let's see if they like the last little addition here. I have a feeling they're going to like the next one. So we're going to build 20 lineups on FanDuel real quick. I'm going to even put them into the free roll to kind of show you guys what I'm doing here. So it takes the baseball. There's just so many players. There's so many different options. We just added the quick stacks. It takes the optimizer a little bit longer for baseball than it does for some of the other sports when there's less variables. Because behind the scenes, our servers they're heating up to like 5,000 degrees right now because I'm trying to make like 20 lineups over here. So it will take just a couple of seconds. I got a couple of questions I can ask right now here. Let's see here. Someone that gets an error for 20, but they only generate 17. Usually something like that is with your settings. So I would tell you to add more players per team. Release some of switch around some of your percentages is typically the best way to do that. So I've made my teams here, and you can see here I wanted 40 to 50% Justin Verlander. I got exactly 40% Justin Verlander. So that's what the optimizer made with all of my different settings. Now, if you guys like the hitter stack or the quick stacks, you'll see I've got a stack summary and a combo summary. Again, you guys don't have these. You will probably have them next week. We just got them available to us this morning to play around with. So what the stack summary does is it tells you who your 4 hitter stacks are, right? So this is what it did. Because I have 10 on one side and 10 in the other, I have 20% of my lineups have 4-man stacks of Baltimore, which is probably a little bit too much. So you really got to know your math when you do things like that. But you get a quick stack summary of what stacks you have. And then also we have a combo summary, which will tell you, right, like a 4-4 here. I have 4 Cleveland hitters, 4 Rockies hitters. I've got 4 Cleveland hitters with 4 Angels hitters. I've got 4 Cleveland hitters with 4 Red Sox hitters. So you can actually see what you have now. Should be available to you soon. This is something I've wanted for a while. So let's talk about this page here. How are you going to use this now that you can see all this stuff to make yourself better lineups in the long run, Chris?
All right, first, let's talk about the player exposures tab, right? So you go there and you're getting a good picture of whether or not you got the types of players that you want. You can see a guy with high projected ownership like Jonathan VR, no surprise, is coming up a lot in the lineup builder. It's because when you have 40% Justin Verlander locked in at 11K, it's really, and you're requiring stacks that's looking for a stack that has a generally good value proposition. A lot of low price hitters for their projection. You're seeing the Orioles kind of pop in there, just be, a lot of reasons because of their opponent, but also just because their pricing is low.
Yep.
And then, of course, I'm looking to maybe try to limit that. If I don't want as much Orioles in there, I can go back to the stack section.
Let's go back to that, right? Let's make a change, because when I don't click make lineups and then use that first one. If I'm making 150 lineups, I probably click make 150 lineups at least like 15 times before I get everything sorted out. It takes a little while to do it. There's no like click button, win money, or, click and win. It doesn't really happen. You got to put some thought into it. So let's pretend now we wanted to change something. What's something we could change and then see how it does on our next 20 lineups?
Well, I think for one thing, I would probably want to lower that max exposure on Justin Verlander. I mean, I don't need 40% Justin Verlander to get a little bit of leverage on the field today if he's only going to be 15 to 20% owned or something like that. So I can really, try to get some better stacks into my mix here just by lowering that. The other thing I might want to do is I might head back to that stacks tab and really maybe put a little bit more of a limit on Baltimore if I'm not interested in playing the Orioles today.
Yeah, so because if you do 10-10, this is, again, you got to know a little bit of math, right? You're opening yourself up to 20% of your lineups having Baltimore stacks. So if I just wanted to do 5 of Baltimore, right, and 5, now the max I would get would be 10% of my lineup. So now, see, even I don't know the math, Gimino, but you got to know what you're doing, and we'll have some shows that really explain what to do here based on the type of player you want to be. Do you want to go, play 3 or 4 teams heavily? Do you want to play 1 team heavily? Do you want a wide swath of players? Do you want to play limited pitchers? Do you want to play a lot of pitchers? There's a lot of different ways to play baseball DFS and tournaments. It's tough to win, but there's a lot of different ways to win. And we're going to do some shows that kind of show you how to be the player that you're comfortable being and being able to use the lineup builder to get the lineups that you want. So let's rerun this, right? We lowered Justin Verlander. We lowered the Baltimore stack. So as this churns through now, again, you'll also see too, I can still go back in here under my lineups. You will see, right? I got the 4-4 stacks and the 4-3 in the exact percentages that I wanted. So all of the things work together congruently to make the lineups that you actually want. It's pretty sweet now, along with the additions to be able to see that you want. It's just really good here. This is some really good additions here. We got a couple here. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you go to the combo summary, I think one of the things it's going to be good for is seeing which teams are kind of pairing well by projections together. And if you start seeing like a team, if you don't have as many different stacks in there, if you're really just running one stack, like let's say you're in the Blue Jays today or something like that, you would see which teams you maybe want to not pair the Blue Jays with, or maybe what. If you're trying to be really unique, you can get a picture of what stacks are pairing well together with the optimizer and sort of swerve off that.
So one question is, what's the max total stack exposure you should add up to? So I'm going to go through this. This is a question we get quite a bit on the hitter stack. So up here on the quick stacks, it tells you, I would try to make sure your quick stack right here is at 100%, right? It's going to ensure you get what you want. The thing with the stack exposures, you can go bananas on it, and it's still going to know, like, mathematically kind of what you're trying to do. If you wanted to be super precise, you could set this somewhere in the 100 to 110% range for each side of the stack, but you're really going to have to start dialing in all your numbers, right? And if you have a lot of time, you could go in there and physically make, right, like let's say Slate IQ was telling me Baltimore was a really good play, but they're only going to be 1% stack owned. And if I wanted to get leverage, maybe I'd only want to use them 3% of the time in my lineups. If you have enough time to do that, you can go in here and manually decide which teams you want to stack and the percentages, right? That's something I'll do when I make lineups. I'll have something in Excel, and it kind of gives me the amount of teams that I want to stack in percentage wise, and then I'll just enter them into here. So you can do that if you have the time and you're knowledgeable enough to do that, or if you just want some flat percentages and then boost your teams. But I would tell you to do the quick stacks at 100. And as you can see here, I have 275%. It doesn't really matter. It knows what I'm trying to accomplish and it will follow it. But if you want to be more precise, you can.
Right. So, I mean, if you have 50% stack, if you just type 50 in that secondary stack box, it's just basically just going to give you optimal. Like, yeah. It's not going to stop until it gets 50% of that team. And then, at that point in time, you're pretty much talking about optimal.
Yeah. So let's go back on to this. We got about 10 more minutes we're going to spend on here today. If you guys want to put any questions in chat, these will be available on demand as well. So if you want to go back to it at a later date, you will be able to watch them along with all the other shows. I do just want to mention one more time about the free roll. Max enter this thing on FanDuel using some of the stuff we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to do that right now to close out the contest, to close out the show. And then if you max enter that and you happen to get top 3, we will get you some RotoGrinders swag. Just message me on Twitter or on RotoGrinders with your screen name, and we'll track it down and get you some stuff. But the key to this free roll is you have to max enter, right? We want you to play along on the show. So max enter that thing on FanDuel if you want to have a shot to win. So let's go back to the lineups, right? We made the good thing here too is we can see the changes, right? Our first build, we had 40% Justin Verlander. Our second build, we're down to 30% Justin Verlander. And we also, Baltimore showing up, once now, twice instead of 4 times. So we lowered our Baltimore exposure. We got less Justin Verlander. We're getting a little bit more variety. And as I would say, now that you can see what you actually have, it's a little bit easier via both the player exposures and the stack summaries to determine what you're actually playing. And if you don't want to play that, go change some of the other options we talked about, build more lineups, and then finally enter them into that. Right, Chris?
Yep. And make sure you load up on all the chalk for this tournament so that I can get all the leverage on you.
Yeah, well, do you even need, you got a RotoGrinders hat on, a RotoGrinders shirt. You probably got the RotoGrinders undies on too, and the socks.
I need it all, man. I need a new shirt, man.
So let's do this to kind of close out the show. I want to show some of you guys, man. All right. I just learned how to use LineupHQ. How do I get these lineups onto FanDuel or onto DraftKings? Both sites have different things. We're on FanDuel here. On another show at a different point in time, we'll use DraftKings. So one of the first things you want to do is there's this button, export lineups to CSV. So CSVs it will create an Excel file, which you can then put onto FanDuel. And FanDuel will take all the little mumble jumble and it will turn it into all your entries onto FanDuel for you. So as you can see, if I enter those into Excel, it looks into something like this, right? What am I looking at here? Well, it's just all the player IDs and it's all the positions that FanDuel needs to be able to accept all that stuff. And we take care of all that for you. How do you get those into the free roll? Well, down here, we have an upload lineups from CSV. This is right on FanDuel. You could click that, and you'll see download a CSV template, which includes all the players in the current slate. So I will click that, and you'll kind of see here, I've got a big blank space here, Chris. Well, what do you think goes in the blank space? It's all the stuff I just downloaded from RotoGrinders. So you don't need this top one here, right? Pitchers, but lines 2 through 21. I just copy that. I go back over to FanDuel. I paste it, click save, and then I go back over to FanDuel, choose the file, which should be the top one here, I believe, and upload it, and it's going to enter my 20 lineups for me. Hopefully it works as it should, and I've got my 20 lineups in. Very easy process if you have Excel. Copy, paste, and click. There's really nothing to it. And as you can see on FanDuel, all the lineups we made are now right here. So don't be scared, right? If you have any problems doing it, you can rewatch this video at a later time. I'm sure if you're watching this and really wanted to understand, you could email support and they could probably help you out either on FanDuel, or I'm sure even the guys at RotoGrinders would be happy to help you out on it too. But it's a pretty easy process at first, right? Like we've got Dean doing this now, guys. Dean understands how to do this. And if Dean can do it, you could probably do it as well.
Yep. Dean doesn't actually have 10% of everyone anymore because he's got LineupHQ and this ability to upload in there. So he's actually getting some leverage on people, not going the 10% route just because it's easy.
We've got a couple of QQs. Do you have anything to add to this? Again, we're going to do much more in-depth stuff on how to, how do we actually, use LineupHQ to make lineups? What are some of our settings? How to become the player you want to be in LineupHQ, right? Do you have anything else you want to talk about for this one?
No, man, I'm good. I'm looking forward to doing hopefully a bunch of these. I'd like to really help people with using the tools and really getting up towards the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah. All right. So a couple QQs have come in. Let's see. On DraftKings, how often do you use player groups for pitchers, SP1 and SP2s, or are you just letting HQ optimize it for you? So I'll answer that for you a little bit. If there's two very chalky pitchers, I haven't looked at ownership or too much of that stuff today. But today, this is for FanDuel, and you can only really use one. But on DraftKings, let me go to that. And I'm assuming you have some projected ownership up for DraftKings already, Chris?
You know it.
All right. So Chris has it up. So this is a really big slate. And there's a couple of ways we've already talked about to limit this. But if you use Wheeler and Verlander in a tournament, you're really playing with the chalk. So it's fine to use those, but you want to make sure that your stack isn't also the chalk, or your one-offs aren't the chalk. So that goes back to the min and max total ownership right here, where if I set this, right, pitcher ownership, these two combined are over 50%. I mean, I can only imagine what some of the chalkier hitters are. It'll add up pretty quickly. So just, if I made normal lineups, all chalk would be something like 170 to 200%. So just by setting this at something like 140, now I could use the chalkier pitchers, but I'm going to have some less chalkier stacks with them. Or if you really didn't want those two in the same, you can make a group, which we didn't really even get into today. We don't have enough time. And you can make, this is really easy. I could just type in Verlander and it's going to find them. I'm going to type in, who's pitching for the Mets today?
Wheeler.
You're
not getting that. That's 20K for those two guys. You aren't getting that anyway. But I mean, if let's say Derek Rodriguez or somebody real cheap that ends up being the chalky cheap guy, that's the more likely pairing you put in there, but you get the idea.
Yeah, and like this, use 0 to 1 at most if one of them is in the lineup. So this would kind of prevent you from playing Verlander and Wheeler. We'll get into groups on a later one, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do in groups. We don't have time today. But we wanted to give you a quick look at LineupHQ and kind of go over it for you guys, give you more of a tutorial, get some of you guys playing it. It's pretty easy to use once you figure it out. There is a little bit of a learning curve, but don't be afraid to kind of max enter. The CSVs is just a couple of clicks with copy and paste of being able to get as many lineups as you want onto FanDuel or DraftKings. And if Dean can do that, I'm pretty sure most of you guys can as well. Right, Chris?
Absolutely.
All right. So that's going to do it for today. If you liked the show, if you got any other questions, ping me on Twitter. I'll try to get to them throughout the day. And if not, stay tuned. We're going to have a more series of this throughout the season where we get more in depth and help you guys just try to get more comfortable using LineupHQ and maybe get into some of the more advanced techniques so you can use it. And also don't forget on the hitter stack, sometime next week, we're hoping to have this out to you where you can kind of make all the things that you want. And then, of course, we're going to have the I don't have any lineups in here yet. Oh, actually, I do. The stack summary, which kind of tells you what stacks you actually have, as well as the combo summary. Hopefully get those into your hands next week. So, Chris, you can get back to the dungeon. I'm going back downstairs. I got to let the dogs out. Thanks to everybody for watching, and we out, you.